Hello, welcome to Arc Studio Presents. I'm Micah Crowdy, a screenwriter and the head of writing at Arc Studio. Please put your virtual hands together for Pamela Ribon. Pam, thank you so much for joining.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me.
How did you end up writing animated films? And was that something you were always trying to get to, or did it just sort of happen organically?
No, I came up in, I have an acting degree. I came up doing sketch and improv comedy in Austin, and then moved out to LA. It was one of my last of my group of friends to come out here, and was doing sketch and improv, and got into variety television and sitcoms, like network sitcom, while also writing like features, just trying to get into, just trying to break in. Wrote a book about a girl writing online. That was my first feature sale. My first TV sale was adapting my second novel. That very first screenplay that I wrote, did well in festivals, and had some interest, and that is the script that eventually ended up over at Pixar and Disney. And then the memoir, Notes to Boys, is what became my Year of Dicks. So I would say most of anything that I've been able to get sold, I had to turn it into a book first.
Mm-hmm. So jumping ahead a little bit in the process, how did you get to that point where now you're writing animated films? You mentioned there was a script that got noticed.
There's a script that got noticed, and I started taking meetings at Pixar and Disney. They only made one movie a year, 2 movies a year. So, you come in and you meet, and then they're like, all right, we'll call you next year. So it took a couple of tries before we found a good fit on what was Moana.
Wow. In that process, how much of a learning curve was there for this specific format of filmmaking?
The specific format of story breaking and writing, I was ready for, because I'd been doing sitcom rooms for so long, and it's very close to that. But it was just, instead of 22 episodes, it's one pilot that nobody sees, that you can't talk about for like 4 or 5 years that you're just going to keep destroying and building again. So that is the learning curve of getting used to, this is a moving train, and you're going to try things over and over again, and you can't get attached to much, but you have to stay very passionate about the project. You have to, as the writer, really be in charge of the scaffolding, because there's so many people working on it in all these different directions. Once it's out of like table read and into any form of, in an animatic form for screenings.
There are a lot of writers on these projects, right? And they're sort of coming in sometimes to do different things at different times, solve different problems perhaps in the story, or...
Well, I think there's burnout, but and there's also just the notion of the writers are freelance. You're not in-house for the most part. So who can you bring to the table in the highest level of your creative world that doesn't rock the boat too much within your studio? It's new writers. But for the most part, your project's got a writer or a writing team that is holding the relay baton through that part of the race. And sometimes it gets passed off to another writer.
If there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen, how do you end up with a cohesive story, that has a through line, not something that sort of has everyone's hands pulling it in a different direction?
Yeah, I mean, it helps to have a leadership who has a vision, that has a target that you can hit, that someone who knows what they are looking for, or a team, and they're aligned, and you know how to service that vision, whether or not you're edit or character design or a writer or a storyboard artist, that you're like, I get the tone that we're doing, and I get the story we're telling.
In animated writing, is there anything in particular, or are there things that you love about that particular format?
There's the collaboration aspect of it that is great, because if you're ever feeling like, oh, I'm not sure about that, there's someone to talk to, or someone who knows all about it, or someone who really would love to just sit and chat with you about it for a while. So that happens in animation in a way, because you're all working together for so long and you get to know each other. And there's that. Writing in particular, I think you get to be free of having to figure out who this is for, because it's for everyone. So you have to think about how to make your very personal story relatable and universal. And if you can keep doing that, that's just the secret That's my favorite thing about writing for animation, is you're writing to everybody's inner child.
Well, you mentioned Moana. I'm just curious, someone had asked a question earlier about how, in terms of the collaborative process, there's also, animation, but there's music and there's these songs which have lyrics. And so lyrics are going to have to tie into the story somehow. How much of that do you know in advance? Or are you like getting a song and be like, okay, we have to make this song fit into this somehow? Or
yeah, I can't speak to how all the processes work, or even what it's like to do 2 of these. So I really only know with Moana, it was always going to be a musical. But I was there before the music team had been assembled. So in that case, I was writing spaces for songs, places where we felt this is probably when she's going to be compelled to sing an I Want song. This is a real establish the world moment. Here's how Maui will get introduced. And I wouldn't assume I'm a lyricist, but I would try to write what we were seeing and what Moana was saying to feel like what could be a song. I would just get a little more lyrical in the way that I was describing what you saw.
And imagine the emotional, there are certain emotional beats that the story needs to be hitting at that point to make it all.
And then for Lynn, he would be like, I can make a song out of that feeling. Like, that's such a great feeling here in this scene. I think it should be a song. And so your scene would go away and a song would get dropped there.
Is the process of the addition, the subtraction, the feedback, the multiple rounds, how does that feel to you as a writer? Is it exciting to be making it stronger and sort of knowing you're going towards a common goal, or is there feelings of frustration of like, we already did this, guys, or like, can we, like, I thought we were good?
Sure. All of it. Both. Yes. I mean, all of it, not just, that's any writing. That's not just animation, but it's like, it's exhausting, and it's the only thing that's predictable is there will be notes, and, you have to care every time, and you have to also, I guess, figure out how to care for yourself while you're doing all that. That's a bit of the trick, because there's something in you that is making you say, how can I help you see this? How can I make this better for you? How can I make this better for everyone? And then at a certain point, you're like, I am tired, right? So you have to know those moments where you're like, oh, I have to step away from this so I can see it again. Or I have to stop talking for a minute so that you can hear me again. Yeah.
So what is the actual script writing process like then? You mentioned working with the animators. Is it being written sequence by sequence, or do you have a full script and then the animators sort of get involved? What's the process?
Yeah. You start with a script, a whole script,
a full script. So you have something.
Again, I don't know about that other studio, but you start with a full script.
But it's not like, okay, here's the first few scenes. Animators are writing them. We're adjusting. Okay, now we move on to the next few scenes. Later,
when you've run out of time, you may not be able to ever get back to, okay, I have a draft, and everything is broken into the sequences, and you're adding sequences and removing them, and they start getting named, interesting names and numbers. But generally, then when there's a screening, then you true up a script, and then that's the screening 3 draft, and we're working from that. So by the time you get to your final screening, a lot of times you're like, it's both exactly what that first screening was and has little bits of everything along the way that we learned to make ultimately this version that feels like what we set out to do to begin with, but is totally different and has thousands of artists' hands on it. And so it's impossible to imagine what it could be from where you started. Yeah.
When you're crafting the scenes themselves in the script, are you approaching the actual scene writing differently in an animated film than in a live action film?
I think the difference in writing for animation is you just have to ask, why am I animating this? Otherwise, it is a live action script. If it can't happen in live action without it being impossible to produce, either financially or technologically, you have an animated film on your hands, because the fish are talking. Right? Like, there you go. The fish are talking. We're animating this. Will it be too scary in live action? It is sometimes used to make us have enough of an emotional distance and an intellectual distance from what we're learning or what we're experiencing so that we don't feel the peril and the grief. Conversely, animation can also put you in a place where you feel the peril and the grief of an entity, because it could be a fish, that you would never normally have empathy for because you've never been immersed in that world the way that you're going to now. I'm trying to be in two worlds at once with you.
Yeah.
And I want to be in your little kid space that is ready to learn why are we who we are. And I want to be in your grown-up space that asks, what can I do about this? Or how will I parent because of this? Or what kind of friend am I going to be after this?
This is a great question from Chantal. Curious about the art of writing a joke that gets a big laugh from both parents and kids. I think this ties into what you were talking about earlier, going into that inner child for everyone.
Well, you can't predict it really, but you can have a good sense. And then I keep going back to Ralph. There was an app that my little when my kid was very little that she used, where you were like feeding a dog or you were feeding a cat, and that was the whole game, and she would just play it for hours. And it made me laugh to think of Ralph and Vanellope getting trapped inside one of these games where you pancake or milkshake and you feed the cat, and then you feed the bunny the milkshake, and that he's just like, 7 hours later, he's still like, this is the best. Why would anyone do anything else with their life? And that made me laugh. And that made the room laugh. And then that is why, like, a kid is going to laugh. It's very silly. It's very basic. It's very human. So we all know that feeling. We all know it. We can laugh at Ralph in a situation where he's doing this. And then my directors were like, also, we're going to blow up one of those animals. Like, that was that was the next step that they took of like, where can you also get a gross out factor? I think I was the person who was like, how many poop jokes can we remove from this script? I'm aiming for 10. But I also have been in the position where I'm like, it needs a poop joke. So that is part of it, of like knowing how serious have you been for a second? So how silly do you need to be now to let us breathe? Or how serious can you be because you've earned it from this level of sophisticated silly of like, we're talking real things and we're being real characters. We're being human, even if we're fish, to this moment that then becomes universal. And often it is just like, it's human behavior.
Speaking of Ralph Breaks the Internet, so that, you came on that as a sequel. What's the challenge like of taking a character, that's already had a journey in the first movie, and then being like, now we're going to take them on another journey? Is it just a question of digging deeper or finding a new path?
Yeah, I mean, people do both, right? So in this case, because if you've done your job well in the first film, your protagonist's main wound has been healed. And therefore, they really don't have much to complain. They shouldn't have much to complain about. We just spent a whole movie with you fixing all your problems. Yeah. And that's why some people do the dark origin story second. And I think when you're not going to do that, you want people to come feeling like, I'm going to sit down with this group of people I care about. Sometimes they're fish. And I want somehow to have the same experience with a new story where they make me feel the same things I felt the last time, but in a new way. And then when I leave, I'm like, can't wait to see the next thing they're up to. That's a little bit the beauty of episodic television.
Yeah.
But in this case, you have to make it be a big, giant story, So in Ralph Breaks the Internet, that's why it was like, oh, this is really what's going to happen to Vanellope, that she hasn't arced from the first story. And so Ralph's got to learn how to deal with the fact that sometimes your friend grows past you in some way. And what do you do about that? So you have that feeling of this isn't the same movie at all, but you know how these characters are going to act. They do still have that moment where you're like, oh, Ralph, how could you do that to her? But it's a totally different story.
Do you feel your background in improv helped you a lot with comedy writing?
Yes, totally. Absolutely. And not like pitching, doing Q&As and podcasts. Like my improv background is used every day all the time. Parenting. Yeah. And it's also, it helps in comedy, but it helps in drama too. Honestly, like improv skills tell you, hang on, nothing is real. Nothing is here. So what do we need? And what are they hoping to feel next? So that's, you're creating it together. Improv is collaborative too. Hopefully you're not alone up there. So it's that knowing that give and take of improv is whatever room you're in, you're reading a room, that's improv, so being nimble and trying to have a good time about it, even on your hard days where everybody wants to kill everybody else in the room. You're like, how do we get through this day? And usually it's by finding something funny.
Similarly, what are some tips on writing clever dialogue? Do you wing it? How do you do it?
I don't know that I've ever written something, or I've sat around and gone, how can this be clever? Or how can I make this clever? But I think clever comes out of knowing you are in familiar territory with the script, with the scene you have to write, a breakup scene. Okay, then how is this scene in this film unable to be done in any other film that has ever existed or will ever exist? And that is where you find the origin of clever. The
unique ingredients of these characters in this moment, in this world, that no one else can replicate.
They're boundaries.
Yeah.
They're boundaries that help you find the freedom of what they would say, because they're not any other character in any other film. So that's, really knowing your character's point of view, which is where great dialogue comes from, is knowing that these people are talking about the same thing, or fish are talking about the same thing, but they're going to talk about it differently because they have a different lived-in experience.
What are the most challenging things when you collaborate with the writing team and discuss to take best decisions of what is right for the story?
Time and money. Time and money. It's the answer to all things. But yeah, it's just challenging. What is right for the story is knowing that this story is what it is today. Like, this helps, right? We're going to move forward because today the story is this, and this idea you have is a great one, but it doesn't fit today's story, and it may fit, and it probably fit the story we had before, and that's where your brain's still working, and that's fine too. Hang on to that, because we're going to be there again. We're going to have this problem again. I can already tell. So hang on to that one. And then sometimes that's you telling yourself, like, yeah, when we get here again, I'll bring up this, and maybe it will make more sense or feel right because we've moved some other things around. And now what I'm seeing is working for everyone instead of just me, because I can't see the problems that they can see.
I will ask you one last question, which I
Sure.
think is the obligatory parting words of wisdom. Yeah, what would you say, words of encouragement or parting words of wisdom?
See how much you can make it on your own. Like, how much of it can you make without hitting that place where you need someone else to read it, vet it, approve it, pay for it. Like, we just have a lot of ways to make your own stuff now, and you don't always have to live in LA to start your career, and all kinds of things they're different now. And don't be alone, and find community and find other people to talk to. Go to festivals, go to workshops, get yourself. Yeah,
form a writer's group.
Yeah, you can form a writer's group, but then that can be like a really small room you've stuck yourself in. So I'm saying, like, let your community be bigger and go see things, go do things, and talk to people, because the one thing that is always true about writing, no matter what, is you are alone. Even if you have a partner, like, at some point you block everything out and go, I have to write this down. So you live in that silent, quiet you space too much. So when you're not doing that, you come up for air, both in a world that has nothing to do with your writing and in a community that would love nothing more than to nerd out with you for hours about what it is that you're working on. They're both equally important for longevity in this industry, so that you can learn. It's not just you. Everybody feels this way. However you're feeling today, everybody feels this way, and it won't stop. So if you hate this feeling, you may not want to do this for a career. If you hate this feeling, stop calling it your career and let it be your hobby, and then see if it feels better that way. If it's just something you like to do. But if you don't know how else you're going to go on, if this isn't what you do, then you need to meet people until you find the group of people that you're going to start doing it with.